Commander Jake Mitchell stared at the holographic display floating above the conference table aboard the Terra Nova, humanity's first diplomatic vessel to venture beyond the local group. The alien script slowly translated into English, each word more absurd than the last. A tournament? Jake's second-in-command, Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez, raised an eyebrow. They want us to participate in some kind of galactic death match? The Zephyrian ambassador, a tall, crystalline being named Veltar, shifted uncomfortably. Its translucent form caught the ship's lighting, casting rainbow patterns across the walls. Not a death match, honored humans, the Deathworld trials. It is, how you say, a rite of passage for species seeking membership in the Galactic Confederation. Jake leaned back in his chair. Humanity had only made first contact 6 months ago, and already they were being asked to prove themselves? Explain these trials. Veltar's form brightened, apparently their equivalent of nervousness. Each species must demonstrate their capability to survive on worlds classified by danger level. Class 1 being relatively safe, Class 13 being, the translator seems to struggle, worlds where even mentioning their names is considered an act of bravery. And humans have to do this because? Your world, Earth, has been classified as a Class 12 death world. The room fell silent. Emma dropped her coffee cup. "I'm sorry," Jake said slowly. "Did you just say Earth is a Class 12 death world?" Veltar's form dimmed. "The Confederation has been monitoring your species for some time. Your planet has extreme weather patterns, massive predators, toxic atmosphere concentrations, geological instability, radiation exposure, and, most terrifyingly, you have creatures that exist solely to inject venom into other creatures. The committee was quite disturbed by your spiders." Jake looked at Emma, who was trying not to laugh. "And you want us to prove we can survive on other death worlds?" "Standard protocol, though we understand if humans wish to decline. Only 14 species in galactic history have attempted the full trials. 3 succeeded." "And the others?" Veltar's glow flickered. "They provided valuable scientific data." Jake stood up and extended his hand. "When do we start?" The crystalline being recoiled at the gesture. That is a greeting ritual on your world? Physical contact?" "It's called a handshake," Jake replied, still holding his hand out. "It's how we seal agreements." "Your species makes physical contact to formalize contracts?" Veltar's glow pulsed rapidly. "This explains so much about your psychological profiles." Emma cleared her throat. "Ambassador, exactly how many species have attempted the Class 13 trial?" "None," Veltar whispered. "We maintain the classification for theoretical purposes only. Most civilizations consider Class 10 to be the absolute limit of survivability." Jake's grin widened. "Well, there's a first time for everything." The silence stretched as Veltar processed this statement. Finally, its form flickered with what might have been resignation. "Very well. The trials begin in 1 galactic standard week. We will prepare medical facilities." "That's thoughtful," Jake said, "but we'll be fine. Just tell us where to show up." As the hologram winked out, Emma turned to her commander. "Are you insane? They just told us our planet is basically hell incarnate." Jake shrugged. "Have you been to Detroit lately?" The first 3 trials were held on worlds the Galactic Confederation considered mildly challenging. Jake had assembled a team of humanity's finest: Dr. Alex Thompson, a biologist who'd survived 3 years in the Amazon; Maria Santos, a geologist who'd mapped active volcanic regions; and Sergeant First Class David Park, a survival specialist who could probably make a 5-course meal out of tree bark. Class 1 was the moon Serenitas, a frozen wasteland where temperatures dropped to 60 degrees Celsius, and the atmosphere was thinner than Earth's highest mountains. The alien observers watched in amazement as the humans simply put on what they called winter gear and began setting up a camp. "This is their survival equipment?" whispered Quanth, a slug-like observer from the mollusk collective. "It looks so," primitive. Jake was busy showing Maria how to build a snow shelter while David started a fire using local materials. "Back home, we call this camping weather," he said, loud enough for the universal translators to pick up. "My grandmother used to walk 5 miles to school in weather worse than this." Dr. Thompson was already collecting samples, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "The crystalline ice formations here are remarkable. They're forming hexagonal patterns that suggest unique atmospheric pressure dynamics." The alien spectators, over 40 different species had gathered to watch, began chittering nervously among themselves. Several had activated emergency heating systems just from watching the footage. Class 2 was the moon Serenitas, a frozen wasteland where temperatures dropped to 60 degrees Celsius and the atmosphere was thinner than Earth's highest mountains. The alien observers watched in amazement as the humans simply put on what they called winter gear and began setting up a camp. "This is their survival equipment?" whispered Quanth, a slug-like observer from the mollusk collective. "It looks so primitive." Jake was busy showing Maria how to build a snow shelter while David started a fire using local materials. "Back home, we call this camping weather," he said, loud enough for the universal translators to pick up. "My grandmother used to walk 5 miles to school in weather worse than this." Dr. Thompson was already collecting samples, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "The crystalline ice formations are fascinating. They're forming hexagonal patterns that suggest unique atmospheric pressure dynamics." The alien spectators, over 40 different species had gathered to watch, began chittering nervously among themselves. Several had activated emergency heating systems just from watching the footage. Class 2 was a desert world called Pyrrhus, where the sand reached 80 degrees during the day and the sparse atmosphere offered little protection from radiation. The humans were expected to last 72 hours. David unpacked what looked like a simple fabric sheet and began constructing a shelter. "Standard issue solar tarp," he explained to the hovering camera drones. "We use these for desert training in Arizona, though this place is actually more comfortable, less humidity." Dr. Thompson was already collecting samples, his face covered with a simple breathing mask. "These crystalline formations are fascinating. They're basically living solar panels. The evolutionary adaptations here could revolutionize our understanding of extremophile biology." Meanwhile, Maria had located an underground water source using nothing but a bent piece of metal and her knowledge of geological patterns. "Water table's about 6 feet down," she announced casually. "Same techniques we use in the Sahara." "They're studying the environment," screamed Veltar into their recording device. "They're not just surviving, they're conducting research." Class 3 was an oceanic world called Aquatica, where massive sea creatures and underwater pressure changes made survival nearly impossible. The humans were expected to stay afloat for 48 hours. Maria had somehow fashioned a raft out of local materials and was fishing with a makeshift spear. "The gravitational pull here creates interesting tidal patterns," she noted, pulling up something that looked like a cross between a shark and a jellyfish. "The marine ecosystem shows remarkable adaptation to the pressure variations." Jake was floating nearby, having what appeared to be a casual conversation with Emma via radio. "Weather's nice here. Reminds me of that time we got stranded in the Pacific during hurricane season. Remember when the Coast Guard said it was too dangerous to attempt a rescue?" Dr. Thompson was documenting the local sea life with obvious excitement. "These creatures have developed bioluminescent communication systems far more complex than anything we've seen on Earth. It's like they're having conversations." David had caught enough fish to feed the entire team and was now teaching a curious sea creature, roughly the size of a whale but with the intelligence of a dolphin, how to play fetch. "They're treating it like a vacation," Quanth observed, its eye stalks quivering with disbelief. "The human just made friends with an apex predator." The betting pools across the galaxy began shifting dramatically. The smart money was no longer on human survival. It was on how badly they would exceed expectations. Word had spread throughout the galaxy. The humans were not only surviving the Deathworld trials, they were thriving. Betting pools had formed across dozens of star systems. Most aliens had put their money on human failure by Class 5, but the smart money was now shifting to a new question. Just how spectacular would human success be? Class 4 was a volcanic world called Infernus, where the ground regularly reached 200 Celsius and toxic gases filled the air. The landscape was dotted with active lava flows and unstable terrain that could collapse without warning. The humans stepped off their transport wearing what looked like bulky metallic suits. These are modified hazmat suits with integrated cooling systems, Dr. Thompson explained to the increasingly large audience of alien observers. We developed them for working near Earth's volcanic regions and in chemical processing plants. The design is based on gear our firefighters use. They have multiple environments like this on their homeworld? Shrieked Zixara, an insectoid observer from the Hive Collective, her compound eyes reflecting pure terror. Jake was casually walking across a cooled lava flow, his boots leaving glowing footprints in the molten rock. This is actually easier than Hawaii during peak summer. No humidity, and you don't have to worry about tourist traffic. David had found a stable spot and was setting up their base camp directly between two active volcanic vents. Natural heating system, he noted with approval. Back home, we'd pay extra for this kind of geothermal setup. Class 5 introduced acid rain and an atmosphere that could dissolve most known materials within hours. The rain fell in sheets that sizzled when it hit the ground, creating pools of liquid that ate through metal like paper. Maria had constructed what appeared to be an underground bunker using local mineral deposits she'd identified as acid-resistant. Basic chemistry, she said, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she had just solved a problem that had stumped galactic engineers for centuries. You find materials with the right pH resistance and work with natural drainage patterns. Dr. Thompson was outside collecting samples of the acid rain itself, his protective suit barely registering the corrosive downpour. The chemical composition is fascinating. It's creating unique mineral formations as it interacts with the local geology. David was hunting local wildlife, creatures that had evolved to survive in what was essentially battery acid. Taste is a bit sharp, he noted, roasting what looked like a metallic lizard over a chemical fire. Reminds me of military rations, but with more flavor. They're eating the wildlife? Quanth reported in a voice that had risen 3 octaves. The creatures that evolved to survive in acid, and they're eating them? Class 6 was a world where the gravity was 3 times Earth normal, and the atmosphere was filled with electrical storms that could fry most technology. Lightning struck constantly, and the heavy gravity made every movement exhausting. The humans adapted by moving differently, closer to the ground, with more deliberate movements. Jake had fashioned a crude Faraday cage out of local conductive materials, creating a safe zone in the middle of the electrical chaos. We have people on Earth who train in centrifuges that simulate high gravity, he explained to the horrified audience, his voice slightly strained but steady. And anyone who's lived through a Midwest thunderstorm season knows lightning safety. Maria was studying the electrical patterns with scientific fascination. The storm systems here follow predictable cycles. If you understand the atmospheric pressure changes, you can predict the safe zones. Emma's voice crackled through their shielded communications. Jake, you're trending on every galactic network. There's apparently a new word being coined in 17 different languages. They all translate roughly to human-level insanity. Copy that, Jake replied, watching a lightning bolt the size of a building strike 30 meters away. Tell them we're just getting started. By now, representatives from over 200 species had gathered to witness the trials. Emergency sessions were being called in the Galactic Senate. There were serious discussions about whether Earth's Class 12 designation was accurate or if their entire classification system was fundamentally flawed. Class 7 was a radiation-soaked wasteland where the background radiation would cook most life forms within minutes. The ground was cracked and barren, dotted with the twisted remains of an ancient civilization that had destroyed itself in nuclear warfare millennia ago. The humans emerged wearing bulky yellow suits with distinctive warning symbols. Standard radiation suits, Dr. Thompson noted casually, checking his dosimeter. Though these are actually lighter than what we use for reactor maintenance back home. The radiation levels here are comparable to a dental X-ray facility. Veltar was frantically taking notes. Your species has experience with radiation exposure? We have workers who spend their entire careers in radioactive environments, Jake replied, casually stepping over what appeared to be a melted tank. Nuclear power, medical imaging, space exploration. This is actually lower radiation than some of our hospitals. The alien observers watched in stunned silence as the humans not only survived, but began systematically exploring the ruins, documenting artifacts and taking detailed measurements of the radiation signatures. David found an intact structure and was using it as a cooking area. The residual heat from the decay makes excellent barbecue conditions, he announced, roasting some emergency rations over a mildly radioactive rock. Class 8 introduced predators, massive, intelligent hunters that had evolved specifically to kill anything that moved. The world was covered in dense forests where visibility was limited and every shadow could hide death. These creatures possessed pack intelligence rivaling dolphins and had never encountered prey that survived their first attack. David moved through the undergrowth like he was born to it, his movements silent and purposeful. Apex predators, he noted, watching a creature the size of a rhino with the intelligence of a dolphin stalk them from a distance. Reminds me of training in the Amazon, except these ones have better tactical coordination. How are they remaining so calm? Demanded Zorak, a warrior species known for their own hunting prowess. Those creatures have killed everything they've ever encountered. Maria was tracking the predators' movement patterns with scientific fascination. They're actually quite beautiful, she observed, sketching their pack formations. Look at how they coordinate their attacks. It's like watching a pack of wolves, but with advanced military strategy. She had started leaving small food offerings, local fruits she'd identified as safe through careful observation. Within days, massive predators were following the humans around like curious pets, bringing them gifts of interesting rocks and dead smaller predators. Class 9 was a world where the laws of physics seemed more like gentle suggestions. Gravity shifted without warning, time moved at different rates in different locations, and the landscape itself seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Previous expeditions had reported complete sensory breakdown within hours. Quantum instability, Dr. Thompson noted, checking his instruments, which were giving readings that violated several fundamental constants. Fascinating. It's like the entire planet exists in a state of superposition between multiple realities. Jake was navigating by dead reckoning, using techniques he'd learned in special forces training when electronic equipment failed. When you can't trust your instruments, you trust your instincts and basic principles. Maria had somehow mapped the shifting gravitational fields and was using them to their advantage, creating a base camp in a zone where time moved slightly faster, giving them more subjective hours to work with. The geological processes here operate on quantum principles, she explained to cameras that were struggling to record in the unstable spacetime. It's like the planet is constantly experimenting with different versions of reality. The aliens watching had given up trying to understand. They were just recording everything, hoping someone smarter than them could figure out how the humans were not only surviving, but actively thriving in conditions that had driven entire research teams insane. They're treating quantum mechanics like a camping trip, Quantha reported, its voice now permanently stuck at a high pitch of disbelief.
The galactic networks had gone silent. Every major species in the Confederation was watching. The humans had now survived environments that had killed entire expeditions of their best warriors and scientists. Emergency sessions were being called in the Galactic Senate. There were serious discussions about whether Earth's Class 12 designation was accurate, or if they needed to create entirely new categories. Class 10 was a world that existed in perpetual war, not between species, but between the environment itself. The planet's ecosystem was locked in constant conflict, with every life form evolved to kill every other life form. The air was poisonous, the water was acidic, and even the plants were carnivorous. Previous surveys had lasted exactly 14 minutes before complete mission failure. The humans set up what they called a defensive perimeter in the middle of what could only be described as biological chaos. It's like Australia, Jake noted, watching a tree attempt to eat a rock while being attacked by a carnivorous flower, but with more variety and better organization. David was keeping a detailed journal of the various creatures trying to kill them, rating them on creativity and effectiveness. Day 3 discovered a new species that appears to be a cross between a bear and a porcupine, but with acid spines and pack-hunting behavior. Reminds me of my sergeant back in basic training, deadly but predictable. Dr. Thompson had somehow made friends with a carnivorous plant by feeding it pieces of other carnivorous plants, creating what he called a symbiotic relationship. Even in the most hostile environments, cooperation is possible, he noted, watching his new plant friend drag away a creature that had been stalking their camp. Maria was mapping the territorial boundaries of different hostile ecosystems. The warfare follows patterns, she explained. If you understand the natural cycles of aggression, you can predict safe zones and travel corridors. The aliens were no longer even pretending to understand. They were just watching in horrified fascination as the humans not only survived, but began categorizing and naming the various ways the planet was trying to kill them, treating it like an academic exercise. Class 11 was a world that shouldn't have existed, where the laws of thermodynamics were more like polite suggestions, where energy could be created and destroyed at will, and where the very concept of alive or dead became meaningless. Matter existed in impossible states, and reality itself seemed to be having an identity crisis. The humans simply adapted, approaching the impossible physics with the same practical mindset they'd applied to everything else. Energy conservation is more of a guideline here, Maria observed, watching her geological instruments give readings that should have been impossible. But the underlying mathematical principles still apply if you adjust for the variable constants. Jake was somehow using the planet's impossible physics to their advantage, creating shelter that existed in 4 dimensions and finding food sources that technically had negative calories but still provided nutrition. It's like engineering school, he explained, but with less math and more improvisation. Dr. Thompson was documenting creatures that existed in multiple states simultaneously. This organism appears to be both predator and prey, living and dead, depending on the observer, he noted with scientific excitement. It's like Schrodinger's cat, but with teeth. David had figured out how to cook using energy that didn't exist, creating meals that were somehow more nutritious than the sum of their ingredients. Military training teaches you to work with what you've got, he said, serving up a stew that glowed with impossible colors, even when what you've got violates physics. I've stopped trying to understand, Emma radioed from orbit. The physics department back home is going to need therapy after they see these readings. The alien observers had started a new betting pool. How long before the humans figured out how to weaponize the impossible physics and accidentally break the universe? They're treating reality breakdown like a minor inconvenience, Veltar reported, its crystalline form flickering with what might have been existential crisis. They've made the impossible seem routine. The moment the humans stepped onto the Class 12 world, everything changed. This was a planet that existed in a state of constant catastrophe. Volcanic eruptions triggered tsunamis that caused earthquakes that triggered more volcanic eruptions in an endless cycle of destruction. The atmosphere was a cocktail of toxic gases that changed composition every few hours, keeping even the most adaptable life forms in constant danger. The wildlife consisted of creatures that had evolved beyond the normal limitations of biology. Things that could survive in hard vacuum, withstand temperatures that would vaporize most metals, and regenerate from almost any injury. The alien observers watched the humans emerge from their transport pod and immediately felt something they hadn't experienced during the previous trials: genuine fear for the human safety. And then Jake stretched, looked around at the hellscape of constant destruction and deadly creatures, and said, "Feels like home." The humans didn't just survive Class 12, they flourished. "This is basically Earth on a Tuesday," David noted, casually dodging a creature that appeared to be made of living lava while it tried to befriend him. "Remember the Australian bushfires of 2023? This is like that, but with better climate control and more interesting wildlife." Dr. Thompson was in his element, literally. "These life forms are incredible. Look at this, a creature that appears to photosynthesize radiation and breathe sulfuric acid. Its cellular structure suggests it could survive direct exposure to solar plasma." "You're describing my neighbor's dog," Jake replied, setting up their camp in the eye of what could only be described as a hurricane made of glass shards and acid rain. Minus the radiation part. Maria was studying the geological instability with academic fascination. The tectonic activity here is fascinating. It's like the planet has ADHD. It can't sit still for 5 minutes without completely rearranging itself. But there's a pattern to the chaos if you know what to look for. But it was what happened next that changed everything. On day 4, Jake noticed that some of the local wildlife, creatures that had been actively hunting them, had started following them around. Not hunting, following. "They're curious about us," Dr. Thompson observed, watching a creature that looked like a cross between a dragon and a living tornado drop interesting rocks at their feet. "I think they recognize us as kindred spirits." A pack of what the aliens had classified as mobile extinction events had started bringing them gifts. Pieces of metal that had survived the constant destruction, even what appeared to be local delicacies that glowed with radioactive energy. "They're making friends with the apex predators," Veltar reported in what could only be described as a panicked whisper. "The creatures that have killed every previous expedition are bringing them presents." David was now teaching a creature made of living earthquake how to fetch, while Maria had somehow convinced a volcanic eruption to reschedule itself around their lunch break. By the end of the week, the humans had essentially established a small colony. They'd figured out how to predict the catastrophic weather patterns using techniques learned from Earth's tornado seasons, had domesticated several species of what the Galactic Confederation classified as planetary threats, and had started a small garden using soil that was technically classified as a chemical weapon. "It's all about adaptation," Jake explained to the cameras as a creature made of living earthquake sat next to him like a giant friendly dog. "Every environment has its challenges, but it also has its opportunities. You just have to be willing to learn." The galactic networks were buzzing with a single question. If this was what humans could do on a Class 12 world, what exactly was their homeworld like? The answer would reshape their understanding of the universe itself. No species in galactic history had ever attempted a Class 13 world. The Galactic Confederation maintained exactly one such designation, and it was used more as a theoretical construct than an actual place anyone would ever visit. Until now. World designation Omega 7. A planet where the very fabric of reality was unstable, where matter and energy were interchangeable at will, where time moved backwards, forwards, and sideways depending on your location, where the concept of alive was so flexible that rocks had opinions and space itself could get angry. The alien observers had stopped taking bets. They were now just trying to figure out how to properly document what they were seeing. The humans stepped onto Omega 7, looked around at a landscape that was simultaneously on fire, frozen, underwater, and in 3 different dimensions at once, and immediately got to work. "Okay," Jake said, consulting a checklist that somehow remained readable despite existing in a reality where written language was more of a suggestion than a rule. "Standard landing protocols. David, secure the perimeter. Maria, geological survey. Alex, biological assessment." "There is no perimeter to secure," screamed Zorak. "Space is folded inside out, and the ground is made of crystallized time." David was already setting up what appeared to be a perfectly normal military camp in a space that existed between dimensions. "You work with what you've got," he noted pragmatically. Dr. Thompson was examining a tree that was growing backwards into its own past while simultaneously being its own fruit. "Fascinating. It appears to be photosynthesizing conceptual energy while reproducing through temporal paradox." Maria was taking core samples from ground that kept changing its mind about what type of matter it wanted to be. "The geological processes here are creative. I think the planet is experimenting with different types of physics." But it was on the 3rd day that the real revelation came. The humans had not only adapted to the reality-bending environment of Omega 7, they were improving it. Jake had somehow convinced a section of space-time to stop folding in on itself and behave in a more linear fashion. Dr. Thompson had established a symbiotic relationship with several sentient equations that had been lonely for eons. Maria had organized the chaotic geological processes into something resembling a schedule. David had taught the aggressive quantum fluctuations some basic manners. How? Veltar finally asked, its crystalline form flickering with confusion. How is this possible? Jake looked up from where he was having a philosophical discussion with a mountain that had been questioning its own existence. You want to know the truth about humans? The entire galactic audience, now numbering in the billions, waited. Earth isn't a Class 12 death world, Jake said simply. Earth is where Class 13 worlds go when they want to relax. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several alien observers fainting. You see, Dr. Thompson continued, what you call death worlds are what we call character building. Every human grows up dealing with environments that want to kill them. We have storms that can level cities, predators that hunt in packs, diseases that rewrite their own genetic code to stay ahead of our medicine, and a sun that's actively trying to give us cancer. Our oceans are filled with creatures that are basically living nightmares, Maria added. Our land masses randomly explode, our weather is completely insane, and we've got plants that eat meat and animals that spit acid. And our response to all of this, David concluded, was to spread across the entire planet, master every environment, and then look up at the stars and say, "What else you got?" Jake stood up, brushing off what appeared to be crystallized possibility. So, thank you for the invitation to join your Galactic Confederation. But we think there might be a small misunderstanding about who's joining who. The humans had not just passed the Death World trials. They had redefined what survival meant. Within a year, the Galactic Confederation had established the human standard for environmental classification. Earth was reclassified as a Class 15 world, a new category created specifically for planets that were so hostile they could be used to train other species for Death World survival. The trials themselves were renamed the Human Challenge and became a way for other species to test their mettle against environments that humans considered pleasantly stimulating. And Jake Mitchell became the first human ambassador to the Galactic Confederation, a position he accepted with the simple statement, "Sure, but we're terraforming your capital planet first. It's too boring." The age of human expansion had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.